Before starting the story, I would like to inform you about a channel. The name of the channel is The Story Man, and this channel has a lot of interesting stories to tell. So guys, what are you waiting for? Go and subscribe to The Story Man channel now, and make sure we give him more than 1,000 subscribers ASAP. Link of the channel is in the description below.
I started a tech job with an IP-DT1 long-distance company. The company is no longer around, and honestly, I don't know how they stayed in business as long as they did. It was really a pyramid scam, but thankfully I was on the IT side of things, so I didn't have to sell anything. It was a small, typical tech support call center. The customers would call in, or Verizon, Quest, etc. would call in and say DT1 lines were down or outages. I was the only female on my team, having to prove myself and show that I can do anything my male counterparts could. It didn't take long, and the customers respected me for being able to handle things. After making my mark, I decided to take the 10-hour night shifts. I worked Wednesday through Saturday from 1 p.m. to 12 a.m., an hour lunch, and after 6 p.m., I was completely alone in the whole building. The rush to get out of the office by 6 p.m. was insane. I couldn't blame them, but I decided having 3 days off was better than 2. Like I said, I was by myself for most of the night. I would have to keep an eye on emails and make sure I answered calls. It was a very slow shift. I would get a lot of video game, reading, schoolwork, and writing done during this time, but sometimes I would just wander the building, walk around just to get away from my desk for a time. I would have the VoIP phone system connected to my cell phone so no calls would be missed. This allowed me to go get a soda, go get food, and so on. One time while I was up away from my desk, I was going down to the lunchroom to grab a soda. The vending machine was on the basement floor. The basement had a wall of windows and one set of security doors. Same for the main entrance, only there was one camera facing that door, but nothing else to really make you feel very safe. I didn't like going to the basement much because the back of the building faced an acre of dark woods. There was a walking path to the woods, but for some reason they didn't install lights for the walking path. Never really sure why that was, but it didn't help the creepy factor. Sometimes I would see animals run past, but other times I felt like someone was watching me. I always tried my best to make it fast when getting a soda or snack, but sometimes it didn't feel fast enough. So, one night I was making my way down to the basement of the building to get a soda. It was a slow, dragging night, and I needed a little caffeine for a pick-me-up. I counted my money as I walked to make sure I had enough to get in and out quick. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw something dart from the glass door back into the darkness. I stopped dead in my tracks and tried to scan the forest, but like I said, it was just blackness. I felt a bit of unease, and everything told me to turn my heels and go back to my desk. But it was 9 p.m., and I had a fair bit of time left on my shift before I could blow this popsicle stand. I tried shaking the feelings off and briskly walked over to the soda machine and made my selection. The soda dropped, and as I bent down to get it, I heard a loud ping noise. It was as if someone had hit the glass with something. I stood straight up and felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I slowly turned around and was scared to see someone out there. But as I made the full turn, I saw once again nothing but darkness. I thought this was a good time to book it back up to the main floor. I didn't bother with the elevator. I went to the stairs and ran up them. My heart was already racing from having to go down there in the first place, then the loud bang, and now running up 2 flights of stairs. Once I was back at my desk, I sunk down in my chair and tried to calm down. It was just one noise, I was in a building with locked doors and locked inner offices. I kept saying over and over again in my head that it was nothing. I was relieved by that, but out of nowhere I got that feeling of someone watching me again. I peeked up over my cubicle wall and looked around my office. Nothing seemed out of place until I turned to face the front of the building. Outside the first set of doors was a slender, tall, dirty man. He was cupping his hands around his eyes to try and see past the reflecting of the lights inside. I dropped back down into my cubicle before he could catch sight of me. He didn't look like anyone I have ever seen at the office, and it was a little past 9 p.m. There was no good reason why he is checking out my office. As I sit in my chair, I hear the door shake. I slowly stood up and watched him pull at the handles of the doors. They didn't budge, to my relief. But as I watched him, he turned to face me. His face looked bruised or dirty. I couldn't tell which. Once his eyes locked onto mine, he started to bang harder and smack the glass. I was so scared. It was the middle of the night. I was by myself and out in the middle of this office building complex. I grabbed my headset and dialed 911. While getting the operator on the line, the guy was walking back and forth from one side of the glass doors to the next. 911, what's your emergency? The lady's voice was direct. Yes, my name is Samantha and I work at Spectrum IT Services building. I need someone to come out. There's a guy trying to break into my office building. While speaking with her, the guy disappeared from view. I tried to look in all directions, but I didn't see him. I knew that he wouldn't just walk off, not with how hard he was banging. Out of nowhere, a good-sized rock came out of nowhere and smashed against the door. I screamed and went under my desk. The operator asked what just happened, and I explained that a rock smashed against the glass door. She asked me if the glass was broken enough to let him in. I didn't want to stand up and look, but she told me to look in order to know where he was now. I crawled out from under my desk and just peeked over my wall and saw a huge crack down the first part of the door. I sank back down and told her to please have the police hurry. She said they were on their way. I have read many stories like this before, and people say that the cops couldn't get there fast enough, and they aren't kidding. It feels like time is standing still, and you can do nothing. Another smash against the door, but along with that, the sound of glass breaking. Sirens could be heard coming towards my building. It was music to my ears. I told the operator that the police had arrived and thanked her for all her support. I stood back up and looked over the cubicle wall, and the red-blue lights were flashing wildly. But the thing I didn't see was the man. The top part of the door was completely smashed, and the rock was laying on the inside of the entryway. One officer came to the front door and others were out combing the area. I could see their flashlights moving all around the parking lot. The first officer to come in the building and greet me was a very kind man. He was patient with me and let me explain what I saw happen. Soon, my boss arrived and checked on me and then the damage. At some point, my husband was called and I told him I would be escorted home by one of the officers. I took the next few days off and started to look for another job that wasn't by myself at night. When I gave my statement, I explained to the officer that the person could be partnered with an ex-coworker who was fired a few weeks prior for stealing and just not showing up. He knew when people came and went. He knew where we kept the cell phones we were selling, not under lock and key, but under a desk of the provisioner. From smartphones to Blackberries, when they were still worth buying, plus VoIP boxes and phone cards. I went on to leave this job a month later and started at a credit card machine company. It was an office full of people, still a call center, but I felt safer, especially with the security and cameras all over the building. Like I said before, This company is no longer around. It was bought up by another company, and they basically liquidated all of the funds that were worth something. So, dirty man who tried to break into my office, let's never meet again.
So this happened over the course of a year. In the fall of 2005, I moved into Goldstein Hall for my freshman year of college. Goldstein Hall was your typical 3-story dormitory, built in the 60s, and had seen better days. My room was your typical cinder block dorm. It wasn't very fancy, but it was home for the year. I quickly threw myself into the college lifestyle. Classes, sports, parties, and living on pizza. Things were normal at first. My roommate Alex was a very shy kid who liked computers and watching football games, but he was homesick and he spent a lot of time at home, so I would get the room to myself. One day while typing up a paper on my computer, I felt a chill go up my back as my TV suddenly turned on. I was creeped out, but I tried telling myself that I must have accidentally hit the remote button even though I knew it was on my bed. There were times I would hear knocks at my window, but nobody would be there. Or I would have my door open and see it slam shut, as though it had been hit with a gust of wind. One day I came home to find my radio was on, even though I knew I had turned it off when I left for classes that day. I would see books being out of place, and there was this one time that my Phillies baseball cap, that I couldn't find for a week, suddenly appeared on top of my computer. Every once in a while, I would smell the strong smell of cologne in my room, despite the fact that I don't wear cologne, and Alex was almost never in the room. Each time something weird happened, I always tried to explain it away to myself, with less and less success. The weirdest incident of that semester happened when Alex and I were sitting in the dorm, watching Thursday night football. When out of nowhere, our microwave came on for about 5 seconds and then stopped. Alex and I looked at each other for a moment, not saying a word. Then we went back to just watching the game. He wound up skipping his Friday morning classes and immediately went home the next day. The end of the semester came, and Alex decided that he was going to transfer out of the school. I wasn't too surprised, because I knew that he wasn't really into going here. After finals, I decided to be nice and help Alex load up his car. My family wasn't going to pick me up for winter break until the next day, so I had no problem with helping the guy move out. We had just finished packing up Alex's car in the parking lot, and we started to say our goodbyes, when Alex suddenly looked at me with a serious expression on his face. He then said, "I don't know how you can stand being in that room. You know what I'm talking about." I then let out a deep breath. "Yeah, I know. I'll be fine." We then shook hands, and I watched Alex leave Goldstein Hall for the last time. Luckily, nothing weird happened that night, and over winter break I managed to convince myself that I was just having an overactive imagination. The new semester started in mid-January of 2006, and I was excited for my new roommate. This time it was a guy named Matthew, who was redshirting for the football team. Matthew was pretty nice, although I didn't have a lot in common with him. Matthew stayed for about the first week of classes, and then immediately switched to another dorm. He didn't even say a word to me about it. I came home from classes one day, and all of his stuff was gone. When Matthew left, all the strange stuff that had been going on in the previous semester started up again. I was willing to deal with the weirdness of the room, because I liked having a double room to myself, for the price of a single room. As a means to cope, I started drinking more. Hey, I was 19 at the time. I learned to ignore it when a weird chill went around the room, or when my favorite sweater would be on my bed instead of in my closet where I had left it, or when I would fall asleep in my bunk bed and hear rustling on the bunk above me, even though it should have been empty. Denial is a beautiful thing. The year eventually started to wind down, and in early April, I wound up getting really drunk at a lacrosse party. And we're talking really drunk, like just short of being hospital drunk. My friends Mason and Ryan walked me home that night, and I remember them helping me get into my bed and placing a trash can right next to it just in case I got sick. I then fell into a deep, drunken sleep. Suddenly I felt water splash across my face. A guy that I didn't recognize stood over me, holding a water bottle. From what I could make out in the dark, he was a short, stocky guy with blonde hair and brown eyes. He yelled at me that there was a fire and that I needed to get out of the building. Confused as to how he got into my room and still being pretty drunk, I somehow managed to grab my phone and stumble out of the building, with the fire alarm blaring and the sprinklers going off. The guy was right behind me until I lost him in the crowd of residents and RAs who were standing in the parking lot in front of the building, waiting for the fire trucks to arrive. It turned out that some genius in his drunken state tried to set off firecrackers in the common area on the second floor, which started the fire. We were allowed to move back in 2 weeks later, after all the water damage was repaired. When I got back, nothing happened in that dorm for the last 2 weeks. I tried looking for the guy that had woken me up in the dorm, but I couldn't find him anywhere. And eventually the year was over, and I left that dorm for good. Fast forward to about Halloween weekend, 2006. I moved back home and switched to commuting to school because, frankly, I had had enough of the dorm life experience. I made friends with a kid in my drama class named John. John was your typical theater nerd, and we got along pretty well. That Saturday afternoon, we were working together in the library for a test. Given that it was Halloween weekend, John and I started talking about our weird experiences. That's when I mentioned that I had been subjected to weird occurrences at Goldstein Hall. John looked at me dead in the eye and said, "You know that's where a kid died back in the 80s, right? My uncle who went here at the time told me about it." John went on to tell me that in April of 1986, a group of guys who were in a frat decided to set off a smoke bomb inside the common area on the second floor of Goldstein Hall. It started a fire that quickly got out of control, and a student died. He was found in his dorm on the first floor, apparently dying of smoke inhalation while trying to escape. Naturally, the story spooked me, and feeling immensely curious, I asked John if he wanted to look up the yearbook archives that were in the library. He agreed, and we were able to find the 1986 yearbook. I thumbed through the yearbook, and then froze when I found what I knew I was going to find. There was a memorial page to the fire victim, Kevin W. Anderson, born August 15th, 1967, and died April 6th, 1986. The smiling photo of Kevin looked exactly like the guy who had woken me up in my dorm the night of the fire.